This fighter looked like a cartoon jet, but in the late 1990s, it was Boeing's big shot. If it won, it would become the backbone of Western air power for decades. If it lost, it was headed straight for a museum. This is the story of the Boeing X-32. Let's go back to the early 1990s. The Cold War is over, at least on paper, but American jets are busier than ever. The problem isn't that the US doesn't have airplanes, it's that it has a full zoo of different ones. You've got F-16 for the Air Force, old FA-18 for the Navy, AV-8B Harriers jumping on and off Marine decks. And on top of that, a mix of attack jets, each dragging along its own training pipeline, spare parts chain, and maintenance tribe. It works, but it's insanely expensive, and the budget is tight. So the Pentagon throws out a brutal question. What if we stop buying totally different fighters and build one family that can do almost everything? On paper, the idea sounds simple. One stealthy core design, 3 variants. You get a land-based fighter for the Air Force, a carrier-capable model for the Navy, and a short takeoff, vertical landing version for the Marines and the Royal Navy. 2 existing efforts get folded into that vision. The Common Affordable Lightweight Fighter, better known as CALF, and the Joint Advanced Strike Technology Program, usually shortened to JAST. Together, they stop being separate science projects and become one huge bet, the Joint Strike Fighter. On slides, it looks clean. In real life, it turns into a knife fight. To avoid another spending disaster, the Pentagon changes the rules. There's no endless corporate money this time, no open-ended prototype games. Only 2 companies are allowed to compete, and each gets about $750 million in JSF funding, with rules that stop them from pouring in unlimited company cash on top. With that fixed pot, each team has to design, build, and fly real jets that prove 3 things in the air. They have to take off and land conventionally, fly a proper carrier-style approach, and show a short takeoff and vertical landing profile. No, trust us, production will be better. Either it flies or you go home. On November 16, 1996, the Pentagon reveals the finalists, Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Same budget, same deadline, same wish list. The prize is a program expected to build thousands of jets for the US and its allies. Win, and you're living off fighter contracts for a generation. Lose, and your airplane becomes something people point at inside a museum. So how do you even attack a competition like that? Boeing's answer is straightforward and ruthless. Don't chase the prettiest jet, chase the easiest one to build and sustain. Their philosophy is one basic architecture, maximum commonality, with as many shared parts and systems across all versions as they can possibly get away with. To make that work, they wrap the X-32 around a massive one-piece carbon fiber delta wing. It's swept to about 55 degrees, thick enough to swallow fuel, wiring, and antennas, and shaped to cruise efficiently around transonic speeds. That single wing can hold around 20,000 pounds of fuel by itself, which is a lot of endurance hiding inside one big composite slab. It's not just a wing, it's a manufacturing bet. One huge composite piece instead of a maze of metal ribs and panels. If they pull it off, production gets faster, cheaper, and more repeatable. If they don't, there is no plan B. You don't get a second try at JSF. Then comes the nastiest challenge in the stack, STOVL for the Marines, short takeoff and vertical landing. Lockheed leans toward a shaft-driven lift fan, basically a vertical cold fan in the fuselage, driven off the main engine, plus a swiveling rear nozzle. It's complicated, heavy, and risky, but it promises incredible hover performance. Boeing looks at that and says, nope, too complex, too expensive, too many things to break. Their counter is brutally direct. One big afterburning turbofan, thrust vectoring nozzles, and small jets at the edges for roll and pitch control. No separate lift fan, no second engine, no giant mechanical tower in the middle of the fuselage. In forward flight, it behaves like a conventional supersonic fighter. In vertical mode, that same engine tilts its thrust downward to hold you in the air. Fewer parts to design, fewer parts to maintain, and easier to build in volume. Sounds clean, right? But that one choice starts to reshape everything. If you want a fighter to hover without tipping over, the center of gravity has to live inside a very tight box. With Boeing's direct lift setup, the easiest way to hit that box is to shove the engine forward, almost directly behind the cockpit. Most fighters park their engines toward the rear. The X-32 carries its engine like a barbell in the middle of its body. Once you move that mass, the intake has to move with it. And that's how the jet ends up with its most infamous feature, the giant chin intake. From an engineering perspective, it makes sense. It has to feed the engine even at zero forward speed, when there's almost no ram air to help. And Boeing's designers plan to hide the compressor face with baffles and blockers to keep stealth intact. On a CAD screen, it's clever. On the ramp, it looks like a stealth fighter doing a shock double take. Inside Boeing and in aviation circles, it picks up some unflattering nicknames, including Monica, and becomes instant meme material. Suddenly, the question isn't just, does it work? It's, can a jet that looks like this really win a trillion-dollar program? Boeing's attitude is basically, you're not taking it to prom, you're taking it to war. Form follows function. The X-32 isn't supposed to be pretty. It's supposed to be a flying power tool. For a while, that logic holds. The early configuration is a clean Delta stealth wedge, one big composite surface doing most of the lifting and hiding. Then, the Navy changes the rules. Partway through the demonstrator build, the carrier community tightens maneuverability and bring-back requirements. The weapons and fuel a jet has to be able to bring back to the ship without turning the landing into a circus. When Boeing runs the updated numbers, their elegant delta wing no longer hits the marks, so they redesign the production jet on paper. A new wing, canted twin tails, better agility, more payload margin. The real X-32, the one they promise for service, starts to look more conventional in the drawings. The problem is that the prototypes are already too far along, and there's no time and no money to rebuild them to match the new shape. Boeing ends up in a tricky spot. They're flying delta wing demonstrators while promising a refined twin-tail production jet that exists only in artwork and slides. Lockheed, on the other hand, rolls out the X-35, looking very much like a smaller F-22 cousin, sleek, familiar, and very close to what will eventually go into service. In December 1999, Boeing unveils both X-32 prototypes at Palmdale. The X-32A is the conventional takeoff and landing version, the STOVL jet, and it's the workhorse of the demo. Underneath, it uses a derivative of the F-22's engine tuned for this airframe. On September 18, 2000, it finally got to prove itself. The A model roars down the runway, uses about 2,200 feet, rotates around 150 knots, and climbs hard enough that the FA-18 chase jets have to light afterburner to keep up. A hydraulic leak cuts the first sortie short, but they still hit most of their planned test points. Over the next months, the cartoon jet quietly shows it's not a joke. Conventional takeoffs and landings, done. Carrier-style approaches, done. Weapons bay doors opening and closing in flight, checked. Supersonic dash, achieved. Refueling behind a tanker, also done. Navy test pilot Rowdy Yates, a former F-14 driver, later says he would have taken the X-32A to an actual carrier deck. That's not fan talk. That's respect from a guy whose job is catching wires at sea. So if the A model works, where does it start to fall apart? That brings us to the short takeoff and vertical landing headache, the X-32B. The STOVL variant first flies on March 29, 2001. It keeps the same core engine idea, but with very different plumbing. A butterfly valve sends hot exhaust to vectoring nozzles near the center of gravity. Cool bypass air is blown under the fuselage to form a sheet that tries to keep the intake from sucking in its own exhaust. Extra nozzles at the wingtips, nose and tail handle roll, pitch, and yaw during hover. On the whiteboard, it looks elegant. One engine, one system, fewer parts than a lift fan jet. But hovering a fighter for real isn't just equations, it's airflow. In low-speed, high-power hover, especially in hot, thin desert air, exhaust goes wherever it wants. On the X-32B, that hot flow starts curling back under the belly and up into the intake. Hot air is less dense, which means the engine makes less thrust right when you need all of it, and the whole power plant is sitting in its own heat plume. Thrust drops, temperatures rise, and the safety margin shrinks fast. At sea level, with thick air, you get more cushion. Up at a high desert base like Edwards, that cushion almost disappears. Boeing realizes they don't have the margin they want to pull off the full hero profile there. The short takeoff, the dash, and the vertical landing in one clean sequence that everyone wants to see. So they make a smart but humbling call and move the main STOVL demo to Naval Air Station Patuxent River at sea level, where the thicker air is more forgiving. To their credit, the X-32B does not fall on its face. Across dozens of flights, it hovers, lands vertically, transitions between modes smoothly, and even flies cross-country. On paper, Boeing can legitimately say they demonstrated STOVL. But there's a catch you can't hand-wave away. The jet can't do everything in one configuration. They need one setup on the ground for maximum STOVL performance and a different configuration for full supersonic performance. That means hardware changes between roles, and no single mission where it takes off short accelerates through the sound barrier and then comes back to land vertically in one seamless profile. Lockheed's X-35B doesn't have that problem. Once they sort out their own technical issues, they bring their jet to Edwards and pull off the hat trick everyone's been waiting for. Short takeoff on a short runway, climb, supersonic dash in the same thin desert air Boeing avoided for the full show, and then a smooth vertical landing back on the pad, all in a single flight in front of cameras and VIPs. Officially, JSF is not a fly-off. Unofficially, that demo is a mic drop. Inside the JSF office, people like Rowdy Yates keep repeating the official line. These are concept demonstrators, not production airframes. The decision is supposed to be about the whole life cycle: manufacturing, sustainment, software, cost curves. It's not just about which jet looked cooler in one flight, but humans are still humans. They can see Lockheed's solution working as a seamless package in the sky. They know Boeing's demonstrators don't match the sleeker production design on the slides. One team is basically saying, "Here's what you'll get." The other is saying, "Trust us, version 2.0 will fix it." How much trust us do you really buy when you're about to sign the biggest fighter contract in modern history? And then there's the part nobody writes into the evaluation forms: the face. At some point, decision-makers, allies, and pilots stand on the tarmac, look at both jets, and they ask a simple gut question: does this look like the future of Western air power? The X-35, with its F-22 style lines, looks like what people imagine when they hear stealth fighter. The X-32, with its giant chin and squat stance, looks like a surprised cartoon character. Is that fair? Not really. Is it real? Absolutely, because JSF isn't just a weapon system. It's also a product that has to sell at air shows, star in recruiting videos, and anchor export pitches for 30 or 40 years. Which silhouette do you want on your brochures? Which jet are you more comfortable selling to allies who are about to sign massive checks? On October 26, 2001, the verdict went public. The Department of Defense picks Lockheed Martin's X-35. It becomes the F-35 Lightning II. Winner takes all stays in place, and there's no "thanks for playing" subcontract for Boeing. The biggest fighter program of the era goes to Fort Worth, not St. Louis. The X-32, once pitched as the future backbone of American and Allied air power, is officially out. For Boeing, this isn't a small bruise. JSF was the next-generation fighter slot, and losing it means watching Lockheed ride decades of production, upgrades, and global sustainment deals while Boeing sticks to Super Hornets, tankers, bombers, and black projects. That flagship fighter seat is gone. The X-32s themselves drift into static display life. The X-32A is shipped to the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Ohio. It sits outside for years, paint fading and composite surfaces chalking in the weather, before finally being restored and moved indoors near another almost legend, the YF-23. The X-32B goes to the Patuxent River Naval Air Museum in Maryland, its once classified lines now serving as selfie backdrops for school trips. And this is where the story twists for the hardcore aviation crowd. With more than 20 years of hindsight, analysts keep coming back to an uncomfortable question. Did the Pentagon bench the jet that was better suited to the industrial fight? Look at what Boeing was really offering: an aggressively simplified, highly common manufacturing approach built around digital work instructions and fast, repeatable builds. In a world where the next major war might come down to who can build, repair, and replace jets faster, that philosophy sounds a lot like what people now call arsenal air power. The F-35, to be clear, is not a bad jet. It brings real strengths, deep stealth, serious sensor fusion, and tight networking. But that performance comes with weight. The lift fan adds mass and maintenance demand, and the promised 70 to 90% commonality between variants never really happens. Instead, you get 3 subfleets that share far less than the early pitch suggested. Sustainment costs keep popping up in budget fights, software upgrades slip, mission-capable rates bounce around and end up in hearings. For an aircraft that partly won because it looked like the future, the long-term story has been a lot messier than the glossy artwork. So what's the real takeaway? The Boeing X-32 tried to win with brutal honesty, radical simplicity in structure, propulsion, and parts. It did what the test cards asked, but thin margins, demonstrators that didn't quite match the promised final form, and a face that never looked right on a poster all stacked up. The X-35 nailed the desert hat trick, looked exactly like people expected a stealth fighter to look, and walked away with the crown. If you want more breakdowns that cut past the brochure photos and dig into the real decisions behind modern jets, hit like and subscribe. The race for air dominance isn't slowing down and will be here for every move.